Some boys kiss me, some boys hug me. I think they're okay. If they don't give me proper credit, I just walk away. They can beg and they can plead, but they can't see the light. 'Cause the boy with a cold hard cash is always Mr. Right. 'Cause we're living in a material world, and I am a material girl. You know that we're living in a material world, and I am a material girl. A material girl. Some boys romance, some boys slow dance. That's alright with me. If they can't rise my interest, then I have to let them be. Well, some boys try and some boys lie, but I don't let them play. The only boys who save their pennies make my rainy day. 'Cause we're living in a material world, and I am a material girl. You know that we're living in a material world, and I am a material girl. A material girl. Boys may come and boys may go, and that's alright, you see. Experience has made me rich, and now they're after me. 'Cause everybody's living in a material world, and I am a material girl. You know that we're living in a material world, and I am a material girl. A material girl.
breath you take, every move you make, every bound you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you. Every single day, every word you say, every game you play, every night you stay, I'll be watching you. Oh, can you see you belong to me? How my poor heart aches with every step you take, every move you make, every bow you break, every smile you fake, every claim you stake, I've been watching you. Since you've gone, I've been lost without a trace. I dream at night, I could only see your face. I look around, but it's you I can't replace. I feel so cold and I long for your embrace. I keep crying, baby, baby, please. Oh, can't you see you belong to me? How my poor heart aches with every step you take, every move you make, every bow you break, every smile you fake, every claim you stake, I've been watching you. Every smile you fake, every claim you stake, I've been watching you. Every smile you fake, every claim you stake, I've been watching you. Every smile you fake, every claim you stake, I've been watching you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the opening session is about to start. Please take your seats and mute your phones. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the Master of Ceremony for this evening, Mr. Alex Taylor.
Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour, bienvenue donc à Paris pour la 9e conférence IAS sur la science du VIH. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this, the 9th IAS conference on HIV science. You've come from all around the world. Could you give yourselves a big round of applause, des applaudissements, vous êtes venus de partout dans le monde pour être ici à Paris ce soir. Merci de votre présence. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Alex Taylor. I'm a European journalist based in Paris, and I'm delighted to be your host for this evening. I myself lost my boyfriend of 7 years to AIDS way back in 1994. That was before tritherapy and just at the beginning of AZT. So as you can imagine, I'm particularly moved to have been asked to be involved in this prestigious event here in Paris this evening. Like you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that you are inspired to see some of the fantastic scientific advancements coming down the pipeline, and to have the opportunity to meet many of you who have been working so diligently so that we can all be here in Paris this evening. We have an incredible lineup of speakers and presentations throughout the coming week. And so we're delighted that this is the kickoff to the start of IAS 2017. Before I bring out the two co-chairs who are waiting to meet you, I would like to remind everyone that we have a total global community tuning in to this week's events, and we will be live streaming our sessions on YouTube channel and sharing across social media. So please, if you could spread the word across your preferred social media platforms with the hashtag IAS 2017. Maybe we could applaud anybody who's watching this live with us now to let them know how many of us are here for this fantastic cause in Paris this evening. It's my pleasure now, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome to the stage your co-chair of IAS 2017, Linda Gale Becker, the International Scientific Chair and President of the International AIDS Society. Let me tell you a little bit, I'm sure you know of her, but Linda Gale Becker is Professor of Medicine and Deputy Director of the Desmond Tutu HIV Center at the Institute of Infectious Disease and Molecular Medicine at the University of Cape Town. She's also Chief Operating Officer of the Desmond Tutu HIV Foundation, a not-for-profit organization that works to improve the well-being of people from some of the poorest communities in South Africa. She herself is a physician scientist with a keen interest in HIV, tuberculosis, and other related diseases. Her research interests include programmatic and action research around antiretroviral rollouts, TB integration, and the prevention of HIV in women, youth, and men who have sex with men. In her role at the Foundation, she is passionate about community development and engagement, and she actively explores new and innovative ways to tackle the challenge that is HIV. She serves national and international committee boards. Along with Linda Gale, I'm sure you'll be delighted to have our IAS local scientific chair, that's Jean-François Delfraissy. He was previously director of the ANRS, or ANRS, France Recherche Nord et Sud Sida, HIV, Hépatite, from 2005 to 2017, director of the Institute of Immunology, Inflammation, Infectious Diseases, and Microbiology of INSERM Aviation. As a medical doctor and researcher, he's published more than 500 articles in the domain of immunology. So I'm sure that both of these will be delighted to say a few words to you. So please welcome me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming your conference co-chairs, Linda Gale Becker, together with Jean-François Delfraissy. Merci de les accueillir.
Good evening, bonsoir, messieurs les co-présidents de la conférence, madame, messieurs, chers collègues, chers amis, bienvenue à tous, bienvenue à Paris. On behalf of the International AIDS Society, our local conference partner, the ANRS, and my co-chair, Jean-François Delfraissy, it is my great privilege to welcome you to the 9th IAS Conference on HIV Science in this beautiful city of Paris. There isn't a better place to hold this year's conference than France, a country that has been such a critical ally in the fight against HIV. We're honored to have here tonight my friend and colleague, Nobel laureate, Professor Françoise Barry-Senoussi of the Pasteur Institute, who nearly 35 years ago co-discovered HIV in this very city of Paris, not too far away from here. From that momentous breakthrough to today, France has been a stalwart leader in HIV research. I would like to recognize in particular my wonderful colleagues of the IAS Governing Council. Your stewardship of this global network of scientists makes this meeting possible. And of course, Owen Ryan, our Executive Director, and his remarkable team at the IAS who continue to work tirelessly for our cause. This is the world's largest open scientific meeting on HIV. At this conference, we will hear about new innovations in pre-exposure prophylaxis, promising updates from vaccine trials, novel and exciting antivirals and treatment strategies, new insights into reservoirs, host immunity, and viral control. We'll see best practices, creative ways of delivering testing, treatment, and prevention, and the impact of combination prevention and treatment in countries and communities. Your work, your innovation and creativity, and we salute you all. We are scientists, but we are also advocates. These labels are not mutually exclusive, and I believe all researchers embody these two roles. Most tragically, two souls who epitomized the spirit of science and advocacy, community, and activism left us this year. We were deeply saddened to hear of our sister Prudence Mabeli's sudden passing in South Africa just last week. And earlier this year, we sadly and unexpectedly lost Mark Weinberg in the United States. Prudence was a friend, a sister in solidarity, a female woman warrior who fought for life-giving treatment, better care, and good governance. She was a passionate woman, passionate about humanity. Mark was a scientist and will be remembered for many critical breakthroughs, but he will be always loved for his compassion, fierce sense of justice, and loyal advocacy. I would ask that we take some time now to reflect on these two precious lives, what they meant to us, what they taught us, and let us renew our resolve to honor their courage through our own renewed commitment. Could you join me in a moment of silence? Thank you.
Act up, fight back, fight AIDS. 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 Act up, fight back, fight AIDS.
Good evening. I'm standing here as a woman who's living openly with HIV, who was a friend of Prudence, and I'm from South Africa. We lost Gogo Prudence Mabele. She died in 2017 with a CD4 count of 14. She was the first Black woman to publicly disclose her status in 1992 at 21 years old. She was one of the world's most visible people living with HIV. She was the deputy chairperson of South African National AIDS Council, working alongside with the deputy president of South Africa as a co-chair of SANAC, representing people living with HIV. She was a co-founder of several leading HIV networks as NAPWA, TAC, PWN, and the president of Society of Women and AIDS in South Africa. Until the virus took her from us, she was one of million-plus deaths in that UN reports. At this conference, we still hear amazing data about what is possible and lot of rhetoric about ending AIDS. We need to be very clear. People who say that we will end AIDS are not the people on the ground and they don't have a clue of what is happening. AIDS is not over. AIDS is not over. If the party starts now, the end will never come. Some of you sitting in this room represent governments. Many of you researchers. Others of you run AIDS program. And too few of you represent communities living and affected by HIV. We are much of the AIDS response. And yet, today, AIDS budgets are falling, and obvious health system investment are still missing. National AIDS programs are still piloting intervention that can save our lives, instead of taking them to scale like differentiate services on PrEP, which practically disappeared from the South African National Strategic Plan, for an example, in South Africa. Legal and public promises to decriminalize sex are still waiting. Treatment literacy, a human rights political education that truly empowers patients, is almost completely missing from programs. Government refused to use their legal powers to break the stranglehold of drugs companies over medicines we need, like MDR and XDR-TB drugs and new ARVs. Billions on research is simply not moving fast enough. Perhaps because funding decisions too often prioritize what researchers are interested in rather than what communities say they need. Where is the research into new TB drugs and TB HIV drugs? Why is it so difficult to get fixed dose drug for TB? I say this not because you in this room should feel guilty. Instead, you need to feel agency, to feel deadly agency of what inactions look like. We need you to feel the outrage. Health was a failure of health system. We need you to understand that prudence should still be alive and think in real terms about what should be doing together. We have to go faster, and we can. If Prudence was alive today, she would say, to hell with this sitting in this meeting. Shut up. Stop talking. Take action. That was Prudence. And I say this knowing that Mark Weinberg were here. He will be the first one to agree. I would like to take this opportunity and ask everyone to stand up. And I'm going to read this pledge. Can everyone say this after me? I'll try to be slower. In her honor and in her memory, we pledge the following. We pledge to stand in gaps left by giants that were Mark Weinberg and Prudence Mabel.
Pledge to stand in the gap that were left by Prudence Mabel and Mark Weinberg.
We pledge to work tirelessly to eliminate unequal access to new ARVs, TB, drugs, and tools for people living with HIV everywhere. Okay. We pledge to work together.
We pledge to work together.
To do everything we can.
To do everything we can.
To strengthen the health system so that it works for all.
To strengthen the health system so that it works for all.
Not just for wealthy.
not just for wealthy
and those in wealthy countries.
and those in wealthy countries.
We pledge to remember
We pledge to remember
to take care of ourselves
to take care of ourselves
and ask every person living with HIV,
and ask every person living with HIV,
how are they taking care of themselves?
how are they taking care of themselves?
We pledge to hold governments,
We pledge to hold governments,
donors,
donors,
corporations,
corporations,
and service providers
and service providers
accountable for delivering on the care of each person living with HIV needs. We pledge to be innovative,
We pledge to be innovative,
unconventional,
unconventional,
and inconvenient
and inconvenient
in our approaches
in our approaches
to end AIDS epidemic.
to end AIDS epidemic.
We pledge to ensure community-based organizations
We pledge to share community-based organizations
like Positive Women's Network
like Positive Women's Network
to have resources
to have resources
and support they need
and support they need
to aid in the fight to end AIDS.
to aid in the fight against AIDS.
We pledge to proximate,
We pledge to proximate,
change narrative,
change narrative,
protect the hope,
protect the hope,
and never get comfortable with the status quo.
and never get comfortable with the status quo.
We pledge never to forget
We pledge never to forget
the light
the light
and the laughter
and the laughter
that Prue brought everywhere she went.
that Prue brought everywhere she went.
We pledge not to mimic
We pledge not to mimic
the love and anger that kept Prue going,
the love and anger that kept Prue going.
keep the rest
Keep the rest
of us fighting until it's over.
until it's over.
Long live the legacy of Dr. Mike Wenbeck and Prudence Malebele. Long live.
Long live.
Long live Prudence Malebele. Long live.
Long
Long live Mark. Long live.
Long
Amanda. 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 Panting AIDS panty.
Party. We thank you.
We are so thrilled and excited to see so many of you here. Thank you for traveling to be here, and thank you for sharing all of your important research. Science is the reason we've made such remarkable progress in the fight against HIV, and science is what will ultimately lead to the containment of an epidemic that has raged across the world, turned families and communities upside down, and continues to claim the lives and haunt individuals. To underscore the central role that research plays, we have renamed this meeting the IAS Conference on HIV Science, and we encourage you to continue doing the great work you do and continue to bring your learnings to this meeting. 2 years ago in Vancouver and last year in Durban, we saw incredible advances, what many of us called the prevention revolution. We learned that a pill a day could keep HIV away, and that undetectable equals untransmittable. We left those meetings hopeful, even optimistic. Since then, frankly, the world seems to have turned upside down. Nationalistic forces are rocking this world, as are horrific acts of violence, terrorism, and human rights abuses. Since the start of the epidemic, and especially since 2000, we gratefully acknowledge the generous monies that have been given worldwide to reduce human suffering and impact HIV globally. We also acknowledge those countries that have stepped up with national funding recognizing the importance of their own national HIV response. But we have seen a decline in global funding for HIV in recent years, and most recently, most worryingly, some major government donors are either calling for or considering substantive cuts to scientific research and program funding. As we gather today, the largest and most important global donor in the HIV response has threatened devastating cuts to funding for research and treatment programs. These onslaughts on funding, principles, and programs have already begun to erode the gains we have so painstakingly made. If we are not actively moving forward on the HIV response, then we are sliding back. Sliding back means sick patients, lost lives, ongoing transmission, and infected children, a world we do not want to go back to. When I think back over the past year, a word that comes to mind is chaos. It's unsettling and frightening. But here's the thing, having witnessed positive political change in my lifetime, I know that creativity and innovation can grow out of chaos. Throughout the world, the AIDS crisis has uniquely spawned collaborations between unusual suspects, scientists and movie stars, activists and heads of state, computer programmers and community organizers, professors, and men and women and children happy to don pink hats and march for evidence-based truths. We need to keep railing against the labels that divide us. As scientists, we must seek more partnerships outside our narrow professional fields. We need more venues like the Cure and Cancer Forum and the Hepatitis Co-Infection meeting that took place yesterday and today, where oncologists, hepatologists, and HIV researchers shared new work and new ideas for how to tackle multiple diseases. For many of us, chaos and change are uncomfortable concepts. As scientists, we seek order, but great things can happen when we step out of our labs and out of the fields of work that we are used to. It also behoves us to interrogate our methods. We have to ask the uncomfortable questions. Are we doing everything we can with what we have? Could we be more efficient with our money and our time? Are we acting quickly enough on the breakthroughs we already have? Are we asking trans people, men who have sex with men, sex workers, people who inject drugs, young women, and others most affected by the epidemic what they really need? Are we listening to their answers? Tonight, I focus again on young people, the face of our future, who are too often handed a raw deal. We must do better, a better job of investing in young people, a better job of deploying the tools we already have to young people most at risk, and a better job of tailoring our research to better understand and address their needs. What's more, we need to support young people to have a stronger role in how policies and programs are designed and deployed. My call to you this evening is to harness the chaos we see around ourselves, beginning at this conference and beyond. Let's forge new partnerships that take us out of our comfort zones. Let's pursue the new science that will deliver the results we need to save lives. Let's channel the chaos and let it fuel our advocacy for the resources we need to do our work and bring an end to HIV. Draconian cuts to research and programmatic HIV funding is a catastrophe we cannot afford to see happen. Prudence and Mark would not allow this. The HIV book is only half written. We have work to do, and each of us has a role to play in undauntingly moving towards the final chapters in the control of HIV. Today, we raise our voices together. We say onward, onward with science, onward with progress, onward with people. United, I know we are stronger than the forces that divide us. Bon courage, viva la science. It is now my pleasure to introduce Jean-Francois Delfrécy, whose French, I promise you, is a lot better than mine. He is my dear friend, a colleague, and someone who I've really grown to love over the last 2 years. He is your local scientific chair for IAS 2017. For more than a decade, he has led the ANRS, furthering France's provenance as a leader in HIV science. My pleasure, Jean-Francois.
Thanks, Linda. French is better, but not English. But bienvenue à Paris, and thanks a lot to all of you to be present for this conference. Thanks to Linda Gale, we have really a very nice collaboration to prepare this meeting in Paris. Thank also to the IAS team and also the NRS team for their great involvement to prepare this meeting. HIV Science comes back to Paris 14 years after the 2003 conference that we organized together with Michel Kazatchkin and Françoise Barré-Sinoussi. That conference was a major event that led to the creation of the Global Fund. During the last 14 years, France has always been at the forefront of science. First, with the Nobel Prize to Françoise Barré-Sinoussi, and also with the research done, coordinated and funded by the NRS, the French Research Agency on AIDS and hepatitis. During the same time, France becomes the second and now the third donor for the Global Fund. We have also to mention that during this period, HIV science has been a major contributor for science in other infectious diseases. Clearly for hepatitis C and B, Ebola and Zika, tuberculosis. A major contributor for drug discovery, innovation for testing, and an example for collaboration between NGOs and scientists in human and social science. Now, let's talk about the future. First, contrary to some experts, I do not agree with the concept of the end of AIDS. It is true that fantastic progress has been accomplished, as Linda Gale mentioned, particularly during the last 5 years. However, more than 2 million new infections occur each year. 40% of HIV-infected people do not know their HIV status. So it's really a long way to go before the end of AIDS. We need more science with 3 major goals. Cure, viral eradication or functional cure. This needs more and more collaboration with cancer research and genetics, for example. Vaccine, preventive and therapeutic vaccine, it's a major goal because in the story of infectious disease, a vaccine has always been fundamental to win the final battle. We need a vaccine also for HIV. Prevention, despite spectacular recent results with PrEP, test and treat, positive interaction between early treatment and prevention, we need innovative strategies for new testing tools and for preventing drugs, including long-acting drugs. To succeed, we need to focus our priorities in terms of coordination and funding of research on basic science and implementation research with a sustained collaboration with the NGO and the civil society. Now, we have to move forward. Our HIV community has to open the window. I mean, we need to develop more and more collaboration between HIV and other medical specialties with a global health vision, and not only HIV. We can help to organize that the chronic disease challenge in the north and the south, including diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and so on. But we can also receive new ideas and new innovation from others. Cancer, genetics, and precision medicine, for example. Clearly, we have no choice. Integration and the HIV platform into global health becomes an absolute priority for the future if we want to end the AIDS epidemics. I'm sure that all these aspects will be discussed during the meeting for the next week, and clearly it's a good time to be vraiment pour gagner la guerre. It's a great honor to introduce the French Minister of Health, Professor Agnès Buzyn. Professor Buzyn is Professor of Hematology in Paris University and is a great specialist in bone marrow transplantation for patients suffering of leukemia. She was for many years the president of the National Cancer Institute with a global approach on research and care. Madame la Ministre, chère Agnès, je vous laisse la parole.
Okay. I think that the fight against AIDS would not have been the same without activists. So thank you for them. Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Mesdames et Messieurs les présidents et directeurs d'organisations internationales, Madame la Présidente, chère Linda Gale Becker, Monsieur le professeur Jean-François Delfrécy, cher Jean-François, Mesdames et Messieurs et chers collègues, I am honored and particularly delighted to be with you to open the 9th Conference on HIV Science organized by the International AIDS Society and the French National Research Agency for AIDS and Hepatitis. This is the third time, following on from 1986 and 2003, that Paris has hosted the conference, which is a key knowledge-sharing opportunity. With over 6,000 delegates expected, I would like to congratulate the organizers for all their hard work and recognize the coming together of all delegates. The global epidemic is unfortunately not yet under control. It affected 36.7 million people in 2016 and continues to develop quickly in some parts of the world. Despite an 11% global decline in new infections since 2010, the recent news that new infections have risen by 60% in Eastern Europe and Central Asia is a real concern. In 2016, 1.8 million people became infected with HIV, and 1.1 million people died from AIDS-related illnesses. In France, HIV shows no sign of weakening, particularly among the highly exposed groups, as shown in the 2016 report of our public health agency, Santé Publique France, which underlined the persistence and sometimes resurgence of risky behavior among young people. Younger generations have no recollection of the epidemic that struck their elders. The fight against AIDS involves the whole of society, including all of its research, institutional and community sectors. Research and prevention continue to play a leading role in our strategies. Research has been the principal tool in strengthening the response to HIV/AIDS, and it is essential to answering the questions that still remain. As you know, As you know, 30 years after the discovery of AIDS virus by teams at the Pasteur Institute and by Françoise Barré-Senoussi, chère Françoise, researchers are as committed now as they have ever been. Since its creation in 1988, the ANRS, the French National Research Agency for AIDS and Hepatitis, has rallied researchers around scientific questions looking to the North and South at all disciplines, regardless of affiliation. The agency, which is now integrated within INSERM, the French National Institute for Health and Medical Research, occupies a leading place in terms of AIDS research output. I would like to take this opportunity to thank its new director, Professor François Dabis, and its previous director, Professor Jean-François Delfrécy, who is co-organizer for the IAS. France is the second most productive nation worldwide in terms of its research output in the fields of HIV/AIDS. France's network of research and expertise is internationally recognized for its excellence. It is the only European country with a dedicated research agency. Huge progress has been made since the discovery of AIDS virus in 1983. Advances in the areas of HIV screening, treatment, the reduction of risk linked to drug use, and research have transformed HIV infection into a chronic disease with restored life expectancy and a better quality of life. This has restored hope and confidence in affected individuals who can now look to the future. In the last 20 years, antiretrovirals have been a true game changer, transforming a certain death sentence into a manageable chronic disease for millions of patients. But research efforts must not let up in first, the basic understanding of host-virus interactions and the establishment of viral reservoirs, which remains a major obstacle in eliminating the virus. Second, in the development of preventive vaccine. In this respect, studies carried out after the TIDE trial, the results of which were announced in Paris in 2009, have guided the trials currently underway, for which we have high hopes. We must work also on the diversification of current therapeutic options, particularly the development of nanoformulations and very long-acting injectable forms, which will again transform not just everyday treatment, but prevention too. The long-term epidemiological monitoring of patients on heart, the study of their side effects and their interactions with the immune system is another field for research. Finally, the leading edge of research is moving toward innovative approaches that combine therapeutic vaccines with other immunotherapeutic interventions with the goal of functional remission. The conference program demonstrates your awareness of the need to open up to other disciplines, such as cancer, which has also experienced a therapeutic revolution in recent years. Research also includes the social science and humanities. I'm thinking of the work needed in regard to risky behavior and the decisive social and cultural factors in disease dissemination. Thanks to research and our collective commitment pursuing this quest for knowledge and innovation, and will bring us closer to the goal of putting an end to the spread of the epidemic. In addition to research, prevention is a fundamental part of our collective commitment. France is fully committed to this approach. A number of French teams are involved in international programs, notably in developing a vaccine which is the only strategy capable of stopping the epidemic. It is our great collective challenge. But until then, we have more immediate challenges for our public prevention policies as prevention tools become more wide-ranging. As a doctor and a minister, I'm absolutely convinced that prevention must be strengthened. Prevention means investing today in healthcare for all, particularly in young people who represent our future adults. It also means investing in the sustainability of our social welfare system, which guarantees universal access to healthcare. Condoms remain the primary prevention tool. Largely accessible, they are the most widespread method for prevention. They remain the primary method for protecting oneself and others from HIV and STD. Recently, thanks to several studies, including those from French researchers, pre-exposure prophylaxis, PrEP, has been introduced to the diversified strategy for preventing the sexual transmission of HIV, enabling the most at-risk individuals to reduce their risk of contracting HIV during a period in which they are exposed to infection. It is important to recognize the fact that some groups are still very vulnerable to HIV. Men who have sex with men and migrants, particularly those from sub-Saharan Africa, many of whom contract HIV on our soil. And now, with medical progress and the growing need to strengthen prevention, a new choice has been made in France to lead a comprehensive and positive sexual health policy while continuing to bolster the fight against STD and HIV on behalf of the most exposed group. At the same time, I would like to emphasize that the government is equally committed to strengthening the fight against all forms of discrimination towards the disease, origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. To this end, I have removed a week ago HIV and viral hepatitis infection from the list of infections preventing certain funeral arrangements. This ban was originally established in France in 1986 as a result of ignorance. Its overtuning puts an end to many years of discrimination suffered by people living with HIV or viral hepatitis, during which time they were denied access to preservation care of their body after death. Given the partial failures of HIV/AIDS in prevention, we must also develop approaches to prevention that combine the social behavioral and the biomedical knowledge. I mean screening adapted to one individual, one point in time, and one situation to reduce STD and HIV. We must continue our efforts to deploy new methods to help these key groups. We must also understand what does and does not work in terms of prevention strategies. To do so, we must mobilize social science and humanities as part of our interventional research. The challenge of screening still remains, and innovation also plays a role in us reaching our goal. Community screening among groups with very high rates of HIV seems to have become an established part of the French system. New tools such as rapid testing, self-testing, are helping to guide people towards screening. Such individuals are now taking a step, not only towards screening, but also towards prevention and overall management. Many parties are involved in prevention and screening, and it is they who will allow us to achieve the goals we have set for ourselves. Indeed, healthcare professionals and organizations play a crucial role in prevention. In France, national free prevention and screening facilities enable those cut off from the healthcare system to find an open door in complete confidence. Outside the system, the work of organizations in the field is equally important, creating a link to those who sometimes prefer or are resigned to remain invisible, creating the link and supporting them through the preventing approach. Cooperation between all these parties is the key to reducing social and territorial inequalities. However, as we know, AIDS is a global challenge, and France has a message for the international community. The determination and commitment of the international community must be maintained at the highest level in order to consolidate our advances and combat against inequalities. Our aim remains the end of the epidemic. Considerable progress has been made in the last 15 years. Since 2000, 30 million new infections have been prevented worldwide, and 7.8 million AIDS-related deaths have been averted. In 2016, around 19.5 million of all people living with HIV had access to treatment, compared to just 7.5 million in 2010. However, half of all people with HIV still did not have access to drugs. The situation is particularly concerning in regions such as Central and Western Africa, where over 75% of people with HIV do not have access to art. Neither it is acceptable that only 40% of the children aged 0 to 14 have access to these drugs. In June 2016, in the United Nations General Assembly resolution called Political Declaration on HIV and AIDS, the member states reaffirmed their commitment in the Sustainable Development Goals to putting an end to the HIV/AIDS epidemic as a threat to public health in 2030. In France, this issue is part of the wider goal of achieving universal health coverage. Our country raised it at various international meetings such as multilateral funds, the G7 and the G20. France has played an historic part in the fight against HIV/AIDS, and we have made it one of our global health priorities, providing one of the largest financial contributions in the world. France has provided the second highest total donations to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, and is also the leading contributor to UNITAID, which accelerates the availability of innovative solutions in treatment, diagnosis, and prevention. This investment has led to considerable progress. Over 10 million HIV-positive individuals are now receiving treatment in developing countries, thanks to the Global Fund programs, and mortality linked to AIDS have dropped there by 45%. Thanks to UNITAID, the cost of HIV medication is 100 times cheaper. France's commitment is also reflected in its support to UNAIDS and its Western and Central Africa catch-up plan, which was adopted by the African Union heads of state in July 3rd last year. This commitment reflects our particular attention to the French-speaking countries, targeted by technical support program, the 5% initiative, which is the second way in which we contribute to the Global Fund. France remains fully mobilized at the international level. It is committed through the work of the government and France's involvement in the key international organizations, through its providers, and also through the mobilization of our researchers involved in North-South partnerships. Organizations and people living with HIV have also played a crucial role, and their commitment alongside researchers has enabled innovative approaches to be developed, which are essential in improving prevention and management. Our shared ambition, led by UNAIDS, is to achieve the 1990 targets within 4 years. To put an end to the AIDS epidemic by 2030, UNAIDS has set the challenge of attaining the 1990 goals in 2020. This means ensuring that 90% of people living with HIV know their status, that 90% of people who know they are HIV positive have access to treatment, and that 90% of people receiving treatment have a sustained suppressed viral load. 2020, like 2030, is tomorrow. So we need not only to diagnose and treat effectively, but also to pursue support to research and work towards prevention. Our response must be political and global. In order to achieve this, innovation must play a role in the fight against AIDS in both tools and our policies. As some of you know, I was recently appointed Minister of Solidarity and Health, and this is an opportunity for me to affirm here before you my personal commitment alongside that of the French government to the fight against HIV/AIDS. With 5 successive action plans in the space of 30 years, public policies have had to constantly adapt. They will continue to do so, informed as closely as possible by advances in research, the needs of prevention, and the expectation of patients. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Ministre. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is a notable HIV and transgender advocate. In 2010, she founded Accept SD, a community-based organization for and composed by transgender people and sex workers in Paris. And she currently works as a peer educator with PAST, Prévention Action Santé Travail pour les Transgenres. Please give a big round of applause for Giovanna Rincon Murillo. Mucho calor!
Bonsoir. Good evening. My name is Giovanna Rincon. In order to understand my commitment, fears, let me tell you my story. I was born in Colombia into a working class family. When I was 12, my family disowned me and I finished up on the street. When I was 19, I became an activist in the fight against HIV and the LGBT movement. 1 year later, I discovered I was HIV positive. When I was 23, I decided to emigrate to Italy, where I became sex worker. I also had the hope that in Europe I could get a treatment for HIV. It was a question of staying alive or letting myself die. So there, I was in Italy, weighed down with the stigma. I was trans and HIV positive. I was now also a migrant and sex worker. All my life, personally and professionally, I had experienced discrimination related to my trans identity, but in Italy, I discovered discrimination related to HIV status and legal status. When Air Visa arrived, me and my friends had to get information to talk to each other and our community about issues related to our situation so we could get the best possible health care. Being refused health care made us hungry, and it was at this point that I became an activist to denounce health care-related discrimination and migrant sex workers who were considered as responsible for the epidemic. This helped me overcome my fear of institutions and encouraged me to become a cultural and community mediator. In 2002, for several reasons, I decided to leave Italy. The rise of extreme right wing political party and the fact that being an undocumented migrant and sex worker was now a criminal offense. I was in prison twice. A friend became very ill with AIDS and I needed health care. I decided to come to France with her. This was a turning point for me. I had to use my experience and transform it into expertise and skill to help my community. In 2010, I co-founded an organization called the Accepteste, aiming to help our voices be heard on health, legal, and scientific issues, and to support the trans community in improving quality of life and health care. We established partnerships with hospitals and community care facilities to develop a health process appropriate to our needs and to facilitate greater community involvement and mediation. We also obtain funding, which is crucial for health democracy, and involving the community in making decisions about issues which are relevant to them. Thus, our initial community development project provoked significant involvement by trans people, migrants, and sex workers on issues relevant to them, such as the recent criminalization of sex worker clients or their needs for community rapid testing PrEP programs. Health is a question of rights, And criminalizing sex worker clients put us all in danger, making us insecure and more vulnerable to violence and infection. Recently, 2 migrant sex workers were killed in Bois de Boulogne, not Frankfurt here. France is no exception. All over the world, trans people are being systematically persecuted and killed, even in countries where there are laws to protect them. It has also become clear that if the status of an undocumented migrant is not legalized, the risk of infection will continue to increase. But instead of this, we are witnessing more severe anti-migration policies in France and all over the world. While some studies have estimated that life expectancy of trans women is 35 years. An American study conducted internationally by Dr. Stéphane Barral has showed that trans women are 49 times more likely to get infected with HIV than the general population, which means they have a 50% chance of getting infected during their lifetime. It is only by paying attention to the margin of the most exposed population and to their specific needs that all the stakeholders in healthcare will be able to improve and adapt treatment and care for key population. We need more research on key population. We need medical and social science research to get more information on how and with whom trans people get infected. In that way, we can adapt a prevention strategy to their needs. With more research on co-infection and comorbidity on interaction between HIV and hormones or drugs in order to give the appropriate treatment to all. We need research to show how violence and repressive policies contribute to the difficult situation and impact the health of an undocumented migrants, drugs users, or sex workers. Therefore, is this absolutely necessary to make key population voices heard, to listen to them and take them seriously in order to stop the epidemic and achieve satisfactory quality of life for all people living with HIV and key populations. Over the last 30 years, science has made significant progress, but we cannot fail to note that the epidemic still has a devastating impact, and we are still far from reaching our target. Please, allow me to borrow the words to those who, 30 years ago, launched what had since become our motto, nothing about us without us. And who led the way to making huge progress in research and care with the Denver Principles. We are trying to modernize these principles today and adapt them to new challenges in research and the fight against AIDS by introducing the Paris Community Declaration. Please sign it to reinforce the news agenda for key population and their central position in the fight against epidemics. Please share it and make it claim your own. We, key population and people living with HIV are dramatically in need of political will and a strong commitment, especially by the richest countries, to the end of the epidemic. In the past, France was leading the political and financial mobilization against AIDS at the international level. But today, where is France? Where is the political courage? Where is Monsieur Macron? President Macron, don't make the epidemic great again. Thank you for your attention. Et merci à toutes les personnes qui m'ont donné le courage pour être ici devant vous. La solidarité, la mobilisation des personnes, des communautés oppressées m'ont porté aujourd'hui devant vous. Je suis désolé pour les personnes qui ne parlent pas anglais, mais sachez qu'on ne lâchera rien et qu'on viendra non seulement au ministère de la Santé en France, aux États-Unis, partout dans le monde, et on ne lâchera rien, ni contre le sida, ni contre les discriminations. Jamais.
Thank you very much indeed, Giovanna. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to introduce our next speaker, a long-standing champion, as I'm sure many of you know, of a people-centered approach to health and development, and a very strong advocate for social justice. Please welcome the Executive Director of UNAIDS, Michel Sidibé.
Thank you. Thank you, honorable ministers, friends, colleagues. Let me start by saying thanks to the mayor of the city of Paris for hosting us here. Paris is a city of lights, is a city of love. Enjoy your stay. I want to just start by saying thanks to civil society, to the scientific groups. I was planning to make a speech, but I can say that this speech is irrelevant now. I want just to pick a few words and elaborate my talk tonight around them. First, I want to say, without activism, without civil society, without science, without innovation, we would have been far, 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 far away from where we are today. We have to remember when in 2003, we were in Paris. In fact, I was here. And the civil society movement was even stronger. They were everywhere here, asking for making sure that the Global Fund can be fully funded. I remember those days we had 1.5 billion only to invest in programs in the countries. You have been asking, you have been creating space to change that trajectory. Today, we are talking about 13 billions of Global Fund. And that is a success story we should not forget about. PEPFAR was not existing in 2003. And I remember those days we were struggling. We were devastated by the fact that we could not do much for people who were sick. We had only 4% of the people on treatment. It is difficult, it is painful to know that we still have 17 million people on treatment, 17 million people waiting for treatment. But we need to also pay attention to our journey. Together, we have been transforming the face of this fight. For the first time, we had more people on treatment than people waiting for treatment. For the first time, we have been able together, and I am saying that, together, we have been able to put 2.4 million people on treatment in 1 year. Who could have believed on that few years ago? That is your success story. That is because we have been able to follow science. We have been able to demonstrate that it's important to achieve 90-90-90. It's important to make sure that people could have access to treatment if we want also to change the face of this tragedy, which is mortality rate, which was so high. We have been able together to really cut by 50% the mortality rate due to HIV/AIDS during the last few years. We have been able to cut the infection amongst the children more than 50% in the last 5 years. This success would have never happened without activism in science, without activism in communities, without you transforming completely the service delivery approach to make sure that community health worker and interface with our people in the different communities are strengthened by your effort. I want to say it will be dishonest to leave this podium without saying that we are failing. We are failing to really make sure that children will have access to treatment. We have 1.2 million children waiting for treatment. They don't have it. Only in West Africa and Central Africa, from where I am coming, we have more than 430,000 children waiting for treatment. We are seeing success stories in Namibia, Botswana, Swaziland, and Lesotho, and I can say in so many other places in southern part of Africa and eastern part. We cannot accept two-speed type of approach. We need to make sure that we could really give chance to people in West Africa and Central Africa to have this treatment. Today, they have only 35% of them who are accessing those life-saving medicine. We need that. But it will not happen without funding. It's important. The deficit in West Africa and Central Africa is $1.9 billion. The deficit globally is $7 billion. We have to be honest. Today, we are asking to the developing world to share responsibilities. For the first time in the fight against any disease, we have 37% of the resources coming from domestic resources. We are seeing decline on donors' resources. And we know that if we continue with such of decline, we will reverse our gain. We will have a rebound on this epidemic, which is not acceptable. We have been suffering so much, seeing so many people dying, that it cannot be possible to just stop and not go ahead. I am calling to all of you to make sure that we mobilize ourselves to fight stigma, discrimination, prejudice, criminalization. Those are the words who are blocking us in Eastern Europe, Central Asia. We have 60% of increase in new infection during the last, the last 6 years. 81% of those new infection are occurring in Federation of Russia. We need to do whatever we can to change that. We need to make sure that we continue to demonstrate that we are producing result, that we are on track for reaching 1990, and together, I'm convinced that we can be able to end this epidemic. Like French people said, maintenant ou jamais. We never had such a window of opportunity. And hope to us to choose this opportunity and help us to end this epidemic. Thank you very much. I'm very happy because Francois told me that I will talk for 20 minutes. It's 7 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed. Merci donc, Michel, for reminding us of the progress. I'm sure that you all agree, ladies and gentlemen, that has already been made along the journey, and of the relentless efforts in order to achieve fast-track results for everybody's efforts. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is our key speaker, our final speaker for this evening. It is my pleasure to welcome onto the stage Dr. Esther Duflo, who's Professor of Poverty Alleviation and Development Economics in the Department of Economics at the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and co-founder and co-director of the Jameel Poverty Action Lab. Dr. Duflo is currently the editor of the American Economic Review, a member of the National Academy of Sciences, and a corresponding fellow of the British Academy. She is going to tell us about human activity and some research in the field of how to better work against the development of the disease. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on the stage Dr. Esther Duflo.
Mesdames et messieurs délégués, monsieur, madame les ministres, activistes, scientifiques, bonsoir. J'ai cruellement conscience qu'il est fort tard et que je suis ce qui reste entre vous et le lit. Donc je vais essayer de faire intéressant et court, puisque je ne peux pas non plus amener le degré d'émotion et d'intensité de Giovanna avant moi, par exemple. I'm truly honored and humbled to address this opening plenary in front of a community of scientists, of activists, of practitioners, which collectively has achieved so much. Nothing in my background as an economist really predisposes me to take my place at this podium, so I feel a bit of an intruder or interloper in this audience. And I think the scientific community wanted me here to deliver one message. HIV science matters, yes, and among those science, social science may be particularly essential in the years to come. Over the last few years, medical advances have been spectacular. Not so long ago, HIV was a death sentence, we've heard it, but treatment progresses have brought it closer to a chronic disease. But collectively, I fear we are at risk of stalling in our progress against the disease because we are not paying enough attention to the reality in the field and the human behavior that underlie the spread of the disease. HIV has held an exceptional place among all diseases, with a remarkable commitment of funds, of energy, of dedication by activists, by researchers towards both research and treatment. And in a sense, becoming a normal disease is a symptom of the triumph of the science of this activism. But it will bring its own set of challenges. Normal diseases, even preventable and curable ones, such as diarrhea, still kill many more people than HIV does in developing countries. And that's because we fail to sufficiently take into account incentives, information, social mores, psychological limitations in human behavior. Today, I want to argue that unless we take that into account in the spread of HIV, we will likewise hit some sort of a wall, and the wonderful medical advances that we are going to hear in the last few days may be limited, may come to a partial waste, unless we pay close attention to these last miles. Part of this also means that I'm going to argue that the HIV community will need to keep the same energy, but perhaps be willing to slightly broaden the focus of its action to health more generally, but also to poverty, which is what underlies the spread of this disease. The fight against HIV has to be a three-legged stool: prevention, detection, and treatment. Treatment is here in parentheses only because I'm not going to talk about it today, obviously not because I don't think it's important, but because it's not what I've done most of my work on. Today I'm going to talk about social science approaches on these first two, and the research I will cover employs large-scale randomized controlled trials in the field, which are often run by scientists, social scientists. It has sometimes come as a surprise to me to find that medical professionals and researchers are somewhat reluctant to think about RCTs to investigate the impact of public health policies. Many scientists fail to see that the same curiosity, openness, willingness to be proven wrong and to try again that's essential in making medical research succeed is just as important when we investigate human behavior and when we investigate actions in the field. Nobody would dream of sending a molecule to the field without testing it, but many of us tend to think that our intuition is good enough as for everything else. Hopefully, I'm going to convince you today that intuition is not good enough, that we keep getting it wrong, and we need to spend a lot more time learning while advancing. This is action research I'm talking about. Let's start with prevention. So what type of intervention can change behavior? Prevention typically has could have three big axes. One of these is to change fundamental attitudes, information, beliefs. The other is what I would put under the whole bucket of technology of the transmission rates. That's circumcision, prevention as treatment. This is without any other change in behavior will make the same person less likely to transmit the infection. And finally, short-term incentives. Quite naturally, especially at the beginning of the epidemics, the focus in prevention was on changing deep beliefs and behavior and attitude. The idea, of course, is if everybody could be convinced that using a condoms at every single sexual interaction, that would virtually eliminate the disease. So there was this idea that that can't be so difficult to convey this message, and therefore this is the most effective way to go about prevention. What we've learned over the last few years has been, unfortunately, slightly disappointing. Not that the fact is not true, that if we could convince people to fundamentally alter their behavior, then the epidemic would stop spreading. But because changing this behavior is actually very difficult, and in particular, it's very difficult for people in situations of extreme poverty. I'm going to be talking today exclusively about research on Africa, not because that's only where the problem is, but this is where my area of focus is, and of course, this is where a lot of the problem is moving forward. So in prevention, the youth are seen, rightly, as a window of hope in HIV prevention, both because their sexual behaviors are not firmly set, and because they are still HIV-free. But unfortunately, once the youth and once the people understood the importance of talking to the youth about HIV, it became a little bit open season about, oh, we are all going to come with our own ideology, which we're going to try and tack on to this particular fight. For example, in many African countries, churches are deeply involved, many churches are deeply involved in HIV curriculum, which of course is not a bad thing per se, but means that the nature of the message is quite constrained. And for example, in Kenya, which is a place where I worked, the HIV curriculum in primary and junior high school is based on the ABCD idea, abstain, be faithful, use a condom or you die, minus condoms, which churches deemed unsuitable for 15 or 16-year-olds, which actually are sexually active. That means that you're talking about abstain, be faithful, or you die, which is not a particularly palatable message for a young person. So one response has been to do kind of smaller experiments with much better curricula. But that's not very practical, because what you do with your great curricula is not going to be accepted by the education system that are going to be run in the country. So what we try to do with some colleagues is to find out the effectiveness of the Kenyan HIV curriculum as it was implemented, or as it turns out, that it was actually not implemented in the schools, but could have been. What we did is we took advantage of the fact that teachers refused to implement the HIV curriculum, even watered down to the ABD concept, because they don't feel comfortable with it, until they've been trained. But the training has been really, really slow. So we basically accelerated the training and used this opportunity to construct an experiment about the effectiveness of this particular curriculum. So we have a large randomized control trial, 360 schools, several thousand kids, which are separated in 4 groups. A comparison group where we don't do anything in particular, a group where HIV curriculum is introduced, schools where another thing is introduced, which is basically subsidizing kids to go to school by paying for their school uniform, and a school where we do 2. And then we followed the kids for 7 years, both for pregnancy, because it comes much quicker. It's actually a very important outcome on its own, unintended pregnancies, and then later on for HIV and HSV too. What did we find? So if you look at the ever pregnant outcome after 5 years, many of the girls have been pregnant. The only group that makes a difference, that has a difference, is the education subsidy group. So the HIV curriculum makes no difference in the pregnancies, even though it's really focusing on abstinence. Ever pregnant at 7 years, the rates are very high, and still we don't see much of an effect of the HIV curriculum, but the education subsidy makes a difference. HIV positive, the great news of this sample is that the incidence is very, very low, even after 7 years, but there is no difference in any group. HSV2, which is much more sensitive because it's much higher, you find, again, no effect of the HIV curriculum on its own, although combined with the education subsidy, it leads to a significant reduction in the incidence of HSV2 infections. So what are we learning from that? We are learning, I think, the perverse effect of focusing on a risk aversion, on a complete risk avoidance strategy. This is a message that's not palatable to young people for good reasons, and therefore it is ineffective. In fact, it is somewhat paradoxical that because the message focuses on abstinence until marriage, what we see is that we have more marriages. So although we have no effect on number of pregnancies, we have effect on number of pregnancy in marriage. That's actually not good news, because in this population, people do not marry kids their own age. The only people they will marry are much older partners who typically are already married, so they go under the name of sugar daddies. The other thing we are learning is that education, not HIV education per se, is actually much more productive than trying to have, it turns out, on this particular behavior that we are targeting, risky sexual behavior, is more effective than something that's targeted on HIV. And why is it the case? Well, it's the case because kids want to be able to stay in school. If they are financially able to stay in school, then they really don't want to become pregnant, because if they become pregnant, they'll be kicked out. On the other hand, if they lose the opportunity to be in school anyway, then being pregnant actually will give them a status, particularly if they can be married to the older father of their kid. So this idea that it's education that is important rather than just HIV education has been confirmed in another trial I've been involved with, which started 8 years ago with 2,000 children in Ghana, where we provided scholarship for secondary school, so paid the entire fee for secondary school for the kids, and I've been following them ever since, with a 96% tracking rate. And what we're finding here is exactly the same thing. You're giving a scholarship for people to go to secondary school, and women are less likely to become pregnant, and men are less likely to exercise risky sexual behavior. Let me now talk about the second type of approaches, which is technological barriers, in a sense, technology approach to reduce the probability of transmission given a particular unprotected sexual behavior. And here I'm just going to talk about circumcision because it's a great example of a medical technology which is a great medical success and is not a policy success. Adult circumcision is known to curb transmission, but since it has been shown, there's been effort after effort after effort to try and convince adult male to become circumcised, and in groups where it's not traditional, it is just not happening. So even though we would love it, it is just not happening. So this is to show that it's not enough to have a great technology. If the technology is not going to stick, then that's not going to work. Of course, that's nothing to say that there are other technological approaches which are extremely important, such as treatment prevention, for example, and prevention of mother-to-child transmission. But it's to say that the technology is not sufficient without understanding of the behavior. Finally, in prevention, I want to talk about another approach, which maybe we have underestimated till today, is the idea that, oh, well, maybe it's quite difficult to change people's attitude and deeply held belief, but maybe it's possible to have them change their behavior by slightly shifting the very short-run incentive that they are facing. So people have been experimenting with incentive to stay STI-free with young people who are, to start with, not affected or who have been treated. And that sounds a bit counterproductive because getting infected with HIV is such a big problem that you would think that the incentive not to do it is large enough that if people undertake risky behavior anyway, there is a deep reason for them to do it. And indeed, it is the case that a lot of the early trials of short-term incentive for staying either HIV or STI-free had been disappointed. But there is a recent study which is actually very interesting, provocative, and probably needs to be extended further and thought about, is some work by Martine Bjorkman and her colleague in Lesotho, where they are providing a lottery for people to remain STI-free. So basically, every time you test, if you are in fact still STI-free, you get a chance to participate in a lottery and win a prize instead of a small transfer. That seems a little bit crazy, but when you look at the results, it's actually pretty impressive, because it did reduce the HIV incidence by about 2 percentage points. And among the risk-loving people, which is the ones who are risk-averse, who are more likely to become infected with STI, it reduced its HIV incidence by much, much more. That's not necessarily to endorse this particular strategy, but to try and encourage you to be quite open about stuff that actually might come from the left field and make a difference. At the end of the day, we want to help young people. Let me talk for a few minutes about detection. We've heard it many times. Many people who are infected by the HIV do not know their status. Even more important, many people who are not infected by HIV do not know their status either. And not knowing your status when you're HIV negative is actually also damaging. So what prevents detection? For a long time, we thought, well, this is, there is fear, there is social barriers, there is access. So what do we know about this? So there is a very interesting early study looking at social barriers and psychological fears and say, look, if people really were scared or if people really had big shame, then I couldn't convince them to get tested for HIV with very small change in the environment. So what they provided is very, very small incentives for people to test, to pick up the result. And you can see that when you get a very, very small reward to pick up the result, we're talking about 10 cents, which is really not very much at all. Then the rate of people who are actually getting the results after being tested increases substantially, perhaps because it's enough in order to provide an excuse, a fig leaf to do it. Another thing she did is to place the tent for the VCT either close by, this is an example of the close by, or far away in the middle of the field. And what you see here is that the further away it is, and the least likely people are to get the results. Again, that goes against the idea of social shame and more in favor of like anything small will just prevent you to do it. So what this means is that maybe this fear, we shouldn't overestimate the fear and the psychological barrier in what prevents people to get tested. And maybe the barriers are much shallower than that. On the other hand, I've been involved in a study that showed that straightforward access to VCT or to condoms is not sufficient either. What we did here is that we visited young people in their homes, and we offered them free VCT, depending on the group, free VCD, 200 condoms, or both, depending on their groups. So what you find, of course, is people who are offered free VCT are more likely to get VCT, get it more often, but that doesn't change anything about their behavior. And that doesn't change, so this is using a condoms, and that also doesn't change anything about having unprotected sex. More surprisingly, and I think this is something that, or perhaps as surprisingly, something that really needs to make us think, this is the same thing for condoms. So access on its own is not sufficient either. So is HIV a disease like any other? I should have put a question mark there. Of course not, it's not. But there are some aspects to it where we could learn some things from the barriers that have been stalling progress against immunization, against regular use of medicine for people with diabetes, for example. There is some issues that are similar in spirit with these issues. Underuse of preventive care, underuse of detection is a general public health problem. It's not just an HIV problem. How do we go about understanding preventive and diagnostic behavior to improve them? We have to think about supply-side issues, like availability of care, but also absence of health professionals. I think a lot of your community have been very effectively focused on that. But we also have to think about demand. We have to think about the relative indifference to what is being told to you you must do, like go test, and if you test positive for, say, malaria, take the medicine, but not if you don't. We have to think about the relative indifference to these messages that are caused by lack of information, by lack of trust in public health system, which in a way have earned it in many cases, and by deep pessimism, which is not just pessimism about the disease, which is pessimism about your life as it stands. We have to think about boundaries and impatience issue. So to conclude, let me reinforce that a narrow HIV-focused approach to HIV in the future might turn out to be self-defeating. I would like to encourage you to think about that. We are stumbling against non-medical barriers in the fight against HIV. We are stumbling against non-take-up of technologies that exist. So as the scientific community is going to develop other technologies, unless we have become better at helping and guiding people and understanding what will make them use these technologies, then we are not likely to reap the full benefits. Thank you very much.
Please welcome back on stage the IAS 2017 conference co-chairs.
So, bienvenue à Paris. Welcome to Paris, and have a very nice conference, and enjoy also Paris. Yeah.
The conference is open. Good evening.
This concludes the IAS 2017 opening session. We wish you all a pleasant evening. As you leave the room, please remember to return your headsets at the door or give them to one of our volunteers. Thank you for your cooperation.